Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Mark Simon, and I have the privilege of serving as the new Executive Director for NAMI Wake County. We've got a great presentation lined up for you, as well as a great presenter who I'll introduce in a moment. First, I thought I'd share just a little bit about our organization. We're NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. We provide advocacy, education, support, and public awareness so that all people affected by mental illness can build better lives. NAMI advocates for everyone who's affected by mental illness, both individuals and the people in their lives. In particular, we work to address disparities and injustices and to promote dignity and inclusion for all people with mental illness and their families. In addition to being advocates, we educate, we listen, and we lead, as evidenced by our public awareness campaigns, the range of numerous programs we provide, and our strong public policy. For 37 years, NAMI Wake County has been at the forefront of mental health advocacy, working tirelessly to ensure that everyone has access to the support and resources they need to thrive. Our vision is simple but powerful: a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community where mental health is valued, and where everyone, regardless of their challenges, can lead fulfilling lives. In the face of the ongoing mental health crisis, our mission has never been more important. We're really here to bridge the gap between the demand for mental health services and the resources available. To help us accomplish our mission, NAMI Wake County offers a wide range of signature programs under the buckets of education, support, and public awareness. And so I've got something shared, and I won't walk through all of it now, and I'll share this after the presentation. But under the education bucket, we've got a number of free 8-week classes led by peers for family members and individuals living with the mental health conditions. And these are evidence-based programs that are designed to facilitate a better understanding of mental health conditions, increase coping skills, and empower participants to become advocates for their loved ones or themselves. We've also got a number of different support groups aimed at meeting people where they're at. And then we have our last pillar, which is public awareness and advocacy. So we've got presentations geared towards the general public, as well as presentations for middle and high school students, teachers, and parents. We've also recently launched a Next Gen Advisory Council, which is a 10-member young adult advisory group intended to incorporate the voices of young people in everything that we do. And what's so great is that NAMI Wake County is able to offer all of our programs free of charge to the community. And so now I'd like to introduce our honored guest speaker, Holly Doggett. Holly serves as the Executive Director of NAMI North Carolina. Before making the move to North Carolina in October 2023, she served as the Director of Patient Experience and the Director of Business Development for Cedar Crest Hospital and Residential Treatment Center in Texas. Her love for NAMI started in 2015 when she was hired as the Executive Director of NAMI Texas. She is a peer and a family member. Holly is a certified NAMI Homefront instructor, a certified NAMI Connection Recovery Support Group facilitator, a NAMI Family Support Group facilitator, a NAMI Family and Friends instructor. She's a trained ASK instructor, a CALM instructor, certified CIT coordinator. She's proud to volunteer for the Veteran Spouse Network, helping other veteran spouses and partners on their journey. Holly holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology from Texas A&M University and a Master of Science in Management and Leadership from Western Governors University. Holly, thank you so much for being here with us today, and we're really excited for you to share your wealth of knowledge on this topic. And with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Hey, everybody, welcome. I hope that you'll find the presentation of value. It's going to be much more of kind of just open discussion about the topics around military cultural competency. And so please feel free to ask questions. You can pop them down in the chat. I know Terry's monitoring that. I'll try and monitor that as well. But I'll also leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Mark gave you kind of my background. I'll tell you why this topic is so important to me. So 11 years ago, I met my partner, Derek, who at the time was active duty at Fort Cavazos. At that point, he had been in the Army for 17 years. We would spend the first 5 years of our relationship with him active duty. And then after 22 years was able to fully retire, but also 100% disabled combat veteran. And I was totally unprepared for anything related to being in a relationship with an active duty service member or a veteran. I knew almost nothing about the military, knew nothing about military culture. Even with my background at NAMI and in the mental health field, thought I knew a lot about PTSD and moral injury and TBI, and figured out that I actually didn't know very much at all. And so through a lot of support of programs like NAMI Homefront and my volunteer work with the Veteran Spouse Network, I'm happy to say that 11 years later, I know a little more than I knew then. I just wish that I had known it sooner. So again, please feel free to ask questions, make comments, and we will go ahead and get started. All right. So military cultural competency. This is kind of our rough agenda, some of the topics that we're going to cover. But again, I want this to be interactive. So if you have other areas that you want to talk about, share personal experiences or anything, I think this will be a great opportunity for you to do that. And so really the idea of cultural competency is that we want to look at factors that shape opinions about the military and military service, both from a public perception and from the perception of service members and veterans. And we'll take a quick look at a couple of different studies that have been done on public perception and on service members' perception. I'll have the links in the PowerPoint presentation. So, if you want to go back later and do more in-depth look at the research, you'll have those links. We also want to talk about the impact of military culture and service members, their vision of themselves, of others, and their worldview, because that definitely has an impact, not only in the relationships that they have, but also in their willingness to seek treatment for mental health conditions that may have arisen as part of their military service, or mental health conditions that they carried into service with them that may have been worsened by that service. And then we're going to kind of wrap up talking about how that culture can contribute to stigma and reluctance to seek treatment, and can also lead to unhealthy behaviors. And with that, so let me, I thought this was a really interesting study from the RAND organization on the public opinions on military service. And this will probably not surprise you, but public perceptions of veterans overall are overwhelmingly positive. The majority of people have positive thoughts about veterans and about service members. Very small percentage endorsed negative stereotypes of veterans. Not surprisingly, those perceptions differ by the respondent's age, their political party, prior military service, family member service, and even race and ethnicity. And again, these are all broken down much more extensively in the RAND research if you want to take a look at it. What is interesting, if you think about the fact that overwhelmingly public perception of the military is positive, a majority of Americans would discourage a young person from choosing to enlist in the military, unless that young person went either through ROTC or some type of a service academy so that they went in as an officer. And then a third of those who would discourage enlisting would still encourage joining via ROTC or the service academy, which I always find is really interesting, that there is such a a divide between looking at someone who enlists in the military versus someone who goes in as an officer. 1/4 of American adults believe that Americans look up to the members of the military. Only 4% believe that most Americans look down on the military. That's a very different perception than during the Vietnam era. And when you're talking to veterans, that is a disconnect that you see pretty regularly, that the thoughts and feelings of service members who served during the Vietnam era felt very differently about their service, especially their return home, than did service members who especially are post 9/11. And to no one's surprise, holding those negative veteran stereotypes, you're much less likely to encourage a young person to want to join the military. All right. So what do veterans think about their service? This actually came from the Pew Research Organization. Again, it's a little older. This is from 2019. The RAND study was from 2022. No surprise, the experiences of post 9/11 veterans differ from those who served in previous eras. One thing I found working with veteran families is that Gulf War veterans feel, at least the families feel, a particular disconnect. We talk a lot about the Vietnam era. We talk a lot about post 9/11. But there are those veterans, who served during the Gulf War, who their families indicate that they and their veteran feel often left out of those conversations, like they're overlooked, as if their service is somehow less than what the veterans from those other eras are talked about. Majority of veterans say they felt proud of their service since leaving the military. Pre-9/11 veterans are more likely to say they frequently felt proud of their service than are post 9/11. So you've got 70% versus 58%. More veterans say the military did a good job of preparing them for life in the service than it did readying them for the transition to civilian life. And that is something we talk about so much in NAMI Homefront and in the Veteran Spouse Network and other organizations that provide support to veterans and to veteran families, is the fact that the military does a very good job of teaching you how to go to war. They do a horrible job of teaching you how to return home, which is a major issue in relationships, in employment, in school, in all aspects of veterans' life. So about half of post 9/11 veterans say readjusting to civilian life was difficult. I think that's probably they're underreporting, honestly, but we'll leave it at that. For many veterans, the imprints of war felt beyond their tour of duty, obviously. Majorities of veterans say the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were not worth fighting. And I really want you to think about that one as we talk about why veterans might, especially post 9/11 veterans, might not be interested in seeking treatment. If you have gone to war, you've made personal sacrifices, your family has made sacrifices, you have watched your battle buddies not return home or return home very broken. And now to look back and say that war was not worth being involved in the first place, can have a major impact on their interest in seeking treatment or really being willing to talk about their service. And again, to no surprise, the majority of Americans and veterans associate discipline and patriotism with veterans, which if you, on its surface, you might not think that's bad, but if you paint all veterans with that broad brush, again, the concept of telling a veteran, thank you for your service. My partner, Derek, it's not that he's offended by that, but he often wants to say, if you knew what I did during that service, I don't think you would thank me. he would prefer that people say thank you for your sacrifice, because he feels like that is something that all veterans do have in common, is that there was some level of sacrifice to their service. So just, again, a small thing, but if you think about, you know, that concept of patriotism and things like that, that the way that we sometimes as a country work to honor veterans may not be something that they feel comfortable with. So when we talk about military cultural competency, and we're not going to get into a lot of this today, it's a short presentation, but it's understanding things like the language. They speak a different language, lots of acronyms. And when I was first in this relationship, which, by the way, the bottom picture is my partner, Derek, during one of his deployments, I spent a lot of time like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And that's important because when we get into talking about why a veteran or a service member might not want to go to a civilian treatment provider, the fact that that lingo barrier exists can be one of those reasons. Imagine going to a therapy appointment and every other statement that you made, your therapist was having to ask you to explain what that language was that you were speaking. The military structure. It took me forever to understand, you know, the brigade, the unit, the command, all of that. But it was important for me to try and figure out, because that was the way that he spoke. And it was also the way that he identified kind of that hierarchy within the military. Why they join? Because again, if you go back to that previous slide, thinking about that concept of patriotism, and it's like, oh, these young men are, you know, and young women, they're joining because they're patriots, they want to serve their country. And for some, that may be the case. Derek comes from a military family. His dad was in the Army, his mom was in the Navy. He was in the Army for 22 years. His brother was in the Navy for 25 years. Next generation, they have a number of that generation who are currently serving, but that's not the only reason that they join. So for some, it's to get the college benefits. For others, it's that concept of security. Some might feel that it was the only option available to them. So again, avoiding that kind of broad brush idea of the fact that, oh yeah, they joined because they wanted to serve their country, they're patriots. Their commitment to mission. And the commitment to mission, I think, in the context of mental health and the context of treatment is so important, because that commitment to mission, the training that they do, often leads to maladaptive behaviors when they are back in the civilian world. And so that's something that we'll talk about a little later on, but understanding how important it is when they are on a mission, that focus, that drive, that being able to tune everything else out. And then the role of honor and sacrifice. Obviously, you know, that's something that we often think of when we think of military service, but it can also be something that, again, can be a hindrance for veterans or for service members to seek treatment. That idea of sacrifice, that sometimes the feeling is, well, I came back, but my battle buddies didn't, and so I don't deserve to get treatment. I should live basically a miserable life because I'm here and they're not. And so, again, so many of these concepts can have both that positive, but also the negative connotations in their lives. All right, and I saw something in chat, so I just want to look at, oh, Donna says, always say thank you for your service, dedication, and sacrifice. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about from what I call from there to here. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the NAMI Homefront program. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But this is actually, I stole this slide directly from my NAMI Homefront trainer's manual. But it's the concept of battle mind skills in combat. And so what we do in NAMI Homefront, this is actually our class 3, we introduce the concept of battle mind skills. Battle mind skills are those hard skills that military members are taught, and truly it's what keeps them safe downrange. It keeps them safe in training exercises. It builds that cohesion. It's really what makes the military work. But as we go through these, I also want to point out that a lot of these skills are, number one, skills that are not ever untaught. And you saw that in that earlier Pew Research study, the idea that, yes, the military prepared me for war, they didn't prepare me to come home. So we teach these skills. They don't have an opportunity to unlearn them. And so they bring those skills back into civilian life, into their relationships, into their community. And what kept them alive downrange is maladaptive often in the civilian world. So again, if you look kind of at that, the red box, buddies, cohesion, battle buddies depend on each other, survive, they share the load and watch each other's back. Okay, that seems like a really great battle mind skill. How could that be maladaptive in the civilian world? Well, imagine if you feel like the only people you can rely on, the only people you can trust are battle buddies, other veterans, that you can never really have a trusting, open relationship. You can't count on someone else because they've never been there. Targeted aggression. Anger can keep one alert, awake, and alive. They have to be ready at all times to make split-second decisions in order to survive. It was really interesting. Derek and I had a conversation recently about the longest that he had ever had to stay awake on a mission, and it was for 4 days. And I absolutely cannot imagine having to do that. But those split-second decisions in order to survive can again really creep in negatively into everyday life. The example of that I often give is that Derek and I were with my daughter and son-in-law on a little vacation. We had gone to dinner theater. Everything was going great. It's one of the theaters where you're going to have dinner during the theater performance. We had gotten to the restaurant portion and we had ordered, waiting for our food to come. And so Derek stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. And again, evening was going great. Everybody having a good time. He comes back in. It took him a little longer than what we thought. We were kind of going like, is he going to get back before the show starts? And when he came back in, he was very visibly not the same person who had walked outside. And so we were all like, hey, are you okay? And he was like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. Let's enjoy dinner, watch the show. So we found out afterwards that what had happened, he had gone out front to smoke. This particular theater is downtown in the city and has some homeless folks, and had some that were kind of, the people who worked at the theater knew them. They were regulars, if you will. And so he was outside smoking, and a gentleman walked up to him and tapped him on the shoulder to ask if he could have borrow a cigarette. And when he did, Derek's split-second decision-making instincts kicked in. He wheeled around, grabbed the guy, threw him over his shoulder onto the pavement, and was getting ready to punch him, when fortunately a couple of women who were standing outside screamed, broke him out of that. He realized what was going on, kind of reoriented himself, and in typical Derek fashion, picked the guy up, apologized, kind of told him what was wrong, walked him into the restaurant, gave them his credit card, and told him to, let the guy order whatever dinner he wanted. It was a hard evening after that. And, how do you just kind of go like, oh, yeah, Okay. So again, something that served him very well there, not serving him very well here. Tactical awareness, is often that hypervigilance, lethally armed, always needing to know where your weapon is. Emotional control, being able to manage or suppress your emotions during combat. It can often become very difficult to access even positive emotions when you're back home. OPSEC, that mission operational security, can make it difficult to build intimacy. You don't need to know that. Oh my gosh, we won't even talk about combat driving. Discipline and order. Again, imagine you've had, all this discipline, this order, you're given an order or you give an order and it's followed. And then now suddenly you're at home with the kids and you've given an order and maybe they're not responding to that order the way that you feel like not quick enough or whatever it is, again, can really creep in and cause difficulties in the family, in a job. Imagine having a veteran who is a supervisor and gives you a directive and maybe it doesn't get carried out as quickly or in the way that they want, and they kind of do that snap, which can create obviously difficulties in the workplace and can make it difficult for a veteran to hold down steady employment. All right, so I want to stop there just for a second and kind of come back, see if anybody had any questions about kind of that first portion that we talked about battle mind skills, maladaptive behaviors, anything like that.
So Donna Castro put in the chat, my son joining was to travel, but he's out now. My nephew was originally to have a different life than he was living. Not a good direction then. Going very well now so far. I pray he is spared the combat mental illness introduced part of the military service.
I do as well, but their military service changes a person. I've got a little slide that talks about that. So I remember Derek was getting ready after we had been dating for a short period of time, was actually getting ready for another deployment. And in the end, the unit decided to keep him back on what's called rear D or rear deployment, because not everybody, there has to be some folks back on base. He was not happy about that. But as we were still in that phase where we were talking about what that was going to be like, a 9-month deployment. And I said something, just in passing about, when he came home, and he said, "You may not like who comes home." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, who I am right now isn't who I'll be when I come home." I said, who will you be?" He goes, "I don't know. But I can just tell you, it won't be this person, because every time I go on a deployment, who I come back as is different." So the boot camp, the field missions, all of that, it's such a different culture that it is going to change them. And so one of the things I hope is that, like, for family members, having information like this and having resources can help you prepare for what those changes might be. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative change, but it's going to change, and recognizing why that change happens and ways that you can be supportive of them, I think, is important. Great question or comment. Any other thoughts? That concept of battle mind skills being maladaptive in the civilian world? Do you feel like knowing things like that would be helpful as either a family member, a friend, a treatment provider?
This is Mina. Yes. I think that would be very helpful. And for those of us who don't work with veterans or mil vets every day, I think as much knowledge of the culture and just listening would be as helpful as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's pull this back up. Let me look at. Oh, thank you, Sharika. So Sharika is just noting as a family member and friend that it is helpful for her to know. So we would not be NAMI if we didn't talk about stigma, right? And so when you think about the military culture, how is the culture helpful to service members seeking treatment? How does it hinder treatment seeking? And then what about families who for so long were truly left out of the conversation? When I was at NAMI, Texas, the VA's position was still, we treat veterans, we don't treat families. Fortunately, that thinking has changed, and they've recognized the role that families can and do play in the treatment of the veterans that they're working with, and that communicating with us, educating us, giving us resources ultimately helps the veteran. So if you think about how the culture could be helpful to service members seeking treatment. I think this really says a lot. Never leave a warrior behind, right? So that warrior ethos, that battle buddy, the cohesion is that the people do want you to get help. And so just that particular part of the culture, I think, can definitely be a positive. The military moved a number of years ago to having embedded behavioral health in the units. So basically the idea was you didn't have to go somewhere else on post or somewhere else on base to get treatment. You had behavioral health providers embedded in the unit. And on its face, that seems like a good idea, right? That you have the folks who are right there. And so if you need support, the problem with that is that there's still such a culture of stigma and fear when it comes to behavioral health in the military for a lot of different reasons. The idea that, hey, if I admit that I'm struggling with a mental health condition, I could lose my chance at promotion. I could actually lose my service, right? I might be chaptered out if I admit that I have a mental health condition. The idea that OPSEC, right, operational secrecy, that bleeds over into you don't want other people to know what's going on in your life. You don't trust a huge number of people. And so, again, admitting that you need help can still be a barrier. But I think the biggest idea, which is why peer support tends to be so effective with veterans, is this concept that you don't leave anyone behind. And that's been a key component of their suicide prevention awareness within the military. So what could be some barriers? We talked a little bit about the idea that, if you let people know that you need help, that can lead to promotions being denied to you. It can lead to, again, being discharged from the military. So if you look at this particular photo, I always laugh when I think about that being Derek standing there on the right, taking that, because the man that I know, he'd be like punching that guy, but he did it, right? Because that's what you do. And so that abusive communication style, punishment, individual mistakes cost everybody. Oh, that guy over there, he's got a mental health condition. Is he going to be able to perform? Is he going to lose it in the field? Can I trust him? So all of those things can be barriers, while again, the things like the teamwork, and the support your team can be positives. I think overall, the stigma within the military, even though it's gotten better, probably in the last 10 years, it still trends to the negative as opposed to the positive. So if you think about that, why might they seek help outside of the system? So outside of the Department of Defense, outside of the VA, that's the stigma, the fear, the mistrust. We talked about that. Lack of knowledge. They may feel like people, oh, that VA provider, they don't know anything. The idea of fact versus fiction, the negative connotations about providers within the military or within the VA, what they're going to do to you. I think I think overall it's fiction, but the idea that all the VA is going to do is pump you up with a bunch of drugs and not help you. Cultural competence and cultural humility, so that you may feel like outside of the system, you may have the military cultural competency within the system, but cultural humility, feeling like perhaps you're someone from an underserved community and you want to see providers who look more like you, who have more of the background that you do. And so you may feel like you can find those providers outside of the military structure. Cultural dissidence creates distance between veteran and provider. So the idea that you can distance yourself from your provider, that you can get help without being too connected to them, if that makes sense. I saw chat pop up. It makes sense to tear them down to build them up. Yep, very much a concept. You're no use to the military being mentally unstable. And then, yes, they get out and it has gotten better with the expanded mental health treatment, so that even some veterans who have a dishonorable discharge may be able to get some treatment, but especially less than honorable discharge. The military looking back and saying, you know what, we discharged this person, and really it was related to a mental health condition that developed because of their service. So maybe we need to look at re-examining what their discharge status is so that they can receive treatment. So this one comes directly from NAMI Homefront. So when you think of that previous slide, why they might want to seek treatment outside of the Department of Defense or the VA systems. This is an actual quote from an individual. So after months of heavy drinking and misuse of prescription drugs, I turned to a community-based provider for help because I didn't want to risk being kicked out of the Army after 20 years of service. Boy, if that doesn't sum up that whole conversation that we just had, I don't know what does. But then, so he talks about, shared his combat experiences, how he lost both legs, came home to find his wife and kids gone. And then the therapist starts crying, kept interrupting me, asking what I meant by this term and that. So yeah, I never went back to him, and I never went to another civilian provider. And yes, I'm still using. So I think, honestly, I could have just done the presentation with just giving you that slide, because it sums up so well the recognition that the military, this culture, heavy drinking, kind of that self-medication, things like that, wanting to get help, recognizing that you need it, but at the same time feeling like whoever you turn to is not a good option. And so you end up kind of frozen, working the best way you can because you don't feel that there are any good treatment options for you. And actually, I saw something pop up in chat. So Patrick, I would argue the military likes to take advantage of mental instability in certain forms. I don't, I get what you're saying. But you know, the reality is they're not looking for mental instability. They're looking for individuals who can conform to a very rigid training process that prepares them again to make those split second, nobody wants to make types of decisions. Okay. Let me check how I'm doing on time. Okay. So you have the veteran, you have the service member. Are they seeking treatment within the system, outside of the system? Where does that leave families, right? And so I just wanted to make sure I left y'all with two really good programs. One's a NAMI program, so NAMI Homefront. If you're not familiar with it, again, the link is here in the presentation. But NAMI Homefront is a 6-week class built on NAMI Family to Family. But it is specifically for loved ones of service members and veterans who have a mental health condition. And the facilitators have that same lived experience. So if you're a NAMI Homefront facilitator, you are the loved one of a service member or veteran who has a mental health condition. That mental health condition doesn't have to be related to service, but I would say that the majority of folks who I have had in my NAMI Homefront classes, they're dealing with some type of a service-related mental health condition, overwhelmingly PTSD. And then the other one that I mentioned briefly is the Veteran Spouse Network. Veteran Spouse Network, spouses in there, they, you don't have to be legally a spouse, partner, whatever. But they do also open up some of their programs to other family members. But for the most part, the majority of the programs are really in that spouse and partner space. They offer classes, they offer support groups, one-on-one peer support. As a matter of fact, NAMI North Carolina's NAMI at Noon presentation yesterday was from Hannah O'Brien from the Veteran Spouse Network. And I am going to drop the link to her presentation in chat because she did such a phenomenal job talking about specifically PTSD and the impact that that has on relationships. And so rather than when I was kind of tweaking this presentation for today, I had originally planned to talk about a little more about PTSD and moral injury and things like that. But I think Hannah covered it so well, and that video from yesterday is now available, that I would rather just drop it down in the chat, and that way you all have access to that. And let me, hopefully I still have it. I do. Okay. So this is really your opportunity. If you have thoughts you'd like to share, questions, anything I didn't cover that you were hoping I would love to hear from you. I can't believe nobody has questions or comments. I know it's Tuesday, it's still early in the week, but
I know, well, first of all, thank you, Ollie, for such an informative presentation. I know there were some members who were unable to join, and so they've going to access the recording. Are you open, if we get additional questions from like fielding this, passing them your way? So
yes.
that goes to everyone on here too. I know sometimes it's hard to think of questions in the moment, but if you have other questions, we can certainly connect you with Holly.
And I'll post my email in the chat. Is there a modality, therapeutic or otherwise, best for helping veterans unlearn the negative mindsets and constructions learned in the military? At this point, it's not about, it's no, as far as I know, no. It becomes more, are there treatments to help veterans deal with all of those things? And the answer to that, fortunately, is yes. CBT, EMDR, there's a lot of work going around along with ketamine therapy. It's interesting if you know how ketamine came about to be a therapeutic for PTSD. It was because it's a sedative, and it was used in a number of surgeries during the post 9/11 conflicts for soldiers who were injured. But it wasn't the only sedative that was used. And they happened to just anecdotally notice that soldiers who received ketamine as their sedative during surgery showed fewer signs of PTSD. And so they put it in the clinical trials, and now it is, approved for that treatment use. So there are, again, a number of different treatment options that are going on, but the military is still not great. What most stories, again, anecdotally, that when you come back from a deployment, there is a mandatory, I think it's still probably 2 weeks that you're off, but you come back together, your unit, and there's this debrief. And basically what they say is, hey, chaplain's at the back of the room if you have stuff you need to share, or the doc's at the back of the room if you want to talk about it. And the soldiers are just like, number one, I'm not going in front of my unit, going back to the chaplain or to the doctor and saying that I need help with anything. And number two, my family's out there waiting. I got 2 weeks off. I'm out. That's the last thing I'm thinking about. And so even that post-deployment transition, they're still not very good at. So Donna, it is a bit overwhelming. I tell people all the time, I was not in a great place in my relationship with Derek when I took NAMI Homefront as a participant. And when we got to class 3 and we did the battle mind skills exercise, and we literally go through these breakout sessions in small groups, and we talk about what did these things look like in the civilian world in your day-to-day life. And so when you go through that and you start to recognize why those behaviors are present, and you recognize how universal they are with all of these service members and veterans. I mean, it's just story after story after story that all line up. One, it really helps. Again, this is what participants tell me, it's what I experience. It helps you recognize the why behind the behavior. It also helps you with that separating the person from the disease that we talk about at NAMI all of the time. And the other thing that it did, Hannah O'Brien did such a beautiful job with this yesterday, and Derek and I actually had a little follow-up conversation about it today, that right now I live with Derek. He's just Derek. He's doing really well. We're doing really well. But there's a person who's still Derek, but it's when he tells me I'm struggling a little bit. And so I have to, when that Derek comes to the forefront, I have to change the way that I communicate with him. I have to really think through certain things that I might share with him, or questions that I might ask him. And then there's PTSD spiral Derek, and that is somebody that I do not know. He can be very difficult to live with. But the thing that I learned is that I recognize PTSD spiral Derek is not the person that is my Derek, but I also recognize that my Derek is in there. And I've learned to basically, what gets said or happens during that period when it's the spiral, that I can't carry it emotionally over into day-to-day life. So that's what has helped me. Those are the skills that I have learned through Homefront, through the Veteran Spouse Network, and have helped me develop better communication skills. And I've shared some of that with Derek, and it's helped him express things better to me. Yeah, so seeing how your son-in-law after 5 tours. Yeah. Donna said her dad as well. Drinking a lot to get through back then. Exactly. So it was suck it up, rub some dirt on it. Literally. Oh, your arm got cut off, rub some dirt on it, it'll be fine. You saw horrible things, rub some dirt on your brain, it'll be fine. You did horrible things, that's life, suck it up, buttercup. Mary, I'm thankful for the healthcare provider at the VA hospital in Hampton, Virginia, who told me I needed Al-Anon. Okay, yeah. I mean, here's the thing, we're living in these relationships. So whether it's our spouse partner, it's a parent, it's a child, you know, I see a lot of that in Homefront, adult parent or parents of adult veterans. You know, a lot of these soldiers are in their 20s. They've already been medically discharged, you know, and so now they're back home, you know, soldiers who did, you know, 2, 3, 4 deployments, and now they can't come out of their room for dinner and they're reliant on their parents. So, you know, it impacts your relationships in so many ways. And so I just encourage people, the great NAMI message, you're not alone. When I was really struggling with my relationship pretty early on with Derek, because what I didn't know was I was going through a period where I was living with PTSD spiral, Derek. And I shared some things with my friends and they all said the same thing. Wow, what a jerk. You need to leave that guy. And then I took NAMI Homefront and I heard other stories about those behaviors and other people who had been told the same thing. Wow, what a jerk. What a loser. How could you stay with that person? And then we were all like, because they're worth the effort that we're trying to put into the relationship, because somewhere inside that person is the person that I got into this relationship with, that I fell in love with, and that I care about. And it was so reassuring to me to know that my experiences were not unique and that there was hope and that I could be in a happy, healthy, caring relationship 11 years later, and that the struggles would still be there. But isn't that true of any of the struggles that we have in relationships? I would just have to adapt the way that I responded to those. I'd still have to have boundaries, right? Boundaries are good. NAMI loves boundaries. But I would learn to adapt my communication styles, my behavior, my expectations, based on the education and the support that I received. And that military specifically was important. And look at that, we're at 12:56. So I am happy to stick around, Mark, if that's okay, for a couple of extra minutes, just in case. I know sometimes people are like, well, I wanted to ask a question, but not in a big group. Or again, my email is in there. Happy to connect you to resources if you need them, that are outside of what I provided in the presentation.
Excellent. That sounds great. Thank you so much, Holly. We're so privileged to have you leading our state office, and so such a great supporter of NAMI Wake County. And yeah, you're welcome to stay on. I'll stop the recording now. So